Somewhere right now, people exists that the government is looking for. They have a different name, a different face, at least in terms of how they carry themselves, how they dress, how they speak. They've built an entirely new life on top of the old one, like one photograph laid over another. And they're doing it one day at a time, knowing that a single mistake, one wrong conversation, one forgotten detail, one slip of the old name, could end everything. This is your life as a fugitive with 100 faces. And by the time this video ends, you'll understand exactly how it works, how long it can last, and why the human mind is both the greatest tool and the greatest threat you have. Let's start with the one thing most people get wrong about fugitives. The popular image is the panicked person on the run, disheveled, sweating, sprinting between cities. That's a fugitive in crisis. A fugitive who survives for years, sometimes decades, looks nothing like that. They look exactly like you. They're the quiet neighbor who pays rent on time, the pleasant regular at the coffee shop who always orders the same thing, the unremarkable person in the back of every room who never makes anyone uncomfortable enough to remember them clearly. Invisibility isn't about hiding. It's about being so ordinary that no one thinks to look. That's the first skill, and it has a name. Law enforcement calls it blending. Psychologists call it impression management, but the core principle is ancient and simple. People remember what stands out, so you stop standing out. This starts with appearance. Fugitives who successfully evade capture for extended periods typically don't go dramatic. They don't dye their hair an unusual color or grow a distinctive beard. They go average. They dress in the colors and styles that match their environment. Not fashionable, not shabby, just ordinary. They maintain a consistent weight because dramatic physical changes are actually more memorable than consistent ones. They study the people around them the way an actor studies a character, and they mirror it. Body language, vocabulary, pace of speech. Not enough to seem like an imitation, just enough to feel familiar. Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston crime boss who spent 16 years as a fugitive after being tipped off about his impending arrest in 1994, was finally caught in Santa Monica, California in 2011. He was 81 years old. He'd been living in a rent-controlled apartment for years, known to neighbors as a quiet older man named Charlie. He fed stray cats. He made small talk with people in the building. The reason he stayed hidden for nearly 2 decades wasn't because no one ever saw him. It's because the person they saw gave them no reason to look harder. But appearance is only the surface layer of the fugitive's problem. The deeper challenge, the one that actually determines how long you last, is your identity on paper. Modern society is built on documents. You need a name to rent an apartment, open a bank account, get medical care, buy a car, board a plane, or do almost anything that requires another person to trust that you are who you say you are. A fugitive without documents isn't a person with a different face. They're a ghost, and ghosts can't function in the world. So the first real task isn't changing how you look. It's building a paper version of a person who doesn't exist. The classic method, used by everyone from ordinary fugitives to Cold War spies, involves what intelligence professionals call a legend. A legend is a complete, coherent backstory. Not just a fake name, a fake history, a fake hometown, fake education, fake employment. Ideally, a fake paper trail that can be independently verified if someone checks. The most sophisticated versions of this involve building the identity from the ground up using real bureaucratic systems, obtaining documents under a false name, then using those documents to get more documents, each one making the next one more legitimate. A fake birth certificate becomes a real driver's license. A real driver's license becomes a real bank account. A real bank account becomes a real credit history. By the time you're done, the fictional person has left real footprints. The older, darker version of this technique was called the tombstone identity, finding the birth record of someone who died young, before the modern era of digital cross-referencing and using it to apply for documents in their name. The deceased child never grew up. They have no adult records, but they have a birth certificate, which was all you needed. Intelligence agencies use this technique. So did ordinary criminals. Modern digital systems have made it significantly harder. Deaths are now linked to birth records in most countries, but the principle remains in use in various adapted forms. Now, here's where it gets genuinely complicated. Documents get you a name, they don't get you a personality. And the personality is what betrays people, not the forged passport, the small, involuntary things that leak out of a person when they're not concentrating on concealing them. The way you order food, the sports team you root for without thinking, the city you almost mention when you're tired, the accent that creeps back in when you're stressed, the reflex to reach for a phone that's registered to your old name. Spy agencies understood this deeply, and their training protocols for undercover operatives reflect it. The CIA, Soviet KGB, and East German Stasi all developed extensive programs for creating what they called cover personalities, complete alternative selves that agents could inhabit convincingly for years. The training went beyond memorizing a biography. Agents practiced thinking in character. They ate different foods. They developed different preferences for music, literature, and sport. They cultivated relationships, real ones, with real emotional stakes, because shallow, hollow relationships are what gets people caught. A contact who feels genuinely connected to you doesn't report suspicious behavior. One who finds you slightly off, slightly cold, slightly wrong, will mention it to someone. This brings us to the most remarkable real-world example of a person who built 100 faces and lived inside them for decades. Markus Wolf. Not a fugitive in the traditional sense, but the man who built more false identities than almost anyone in recorded Cold War history, and who ran the most successful human intelligence operation of the 20th century on the strength of it. Wolf served as the head of the main directorate for reconnaissance, the Foreign Intelligence Division of the East German Stasi, from 1952 to 1987. For the first 25 years of his career, Western intelligence agencies didn't know what he looked like. No photograph existed in their files, no confirmed description. He moved through the world, operating an entire network of false identities, while being himself one of the most invisible figures in European politics. They called him the man without a face. Wolf's genius wasn't his own disguises. It was his understanding that the most convincing false identity is one built on genuine emotional connection. He developed what became known as Romeo agents. Operatives, typically young men, deployed to befriend, romance, and ultimately recruit lonely secretaries and mid-level employees at NATO, West German government ministries, and intelligence agencies. These weren't dramatic seductions. They were long, patient relationships built over months and years, in which the East German operative genuinely invested in the emotional life of their target. By the time the target was providing sensitive information, they often didn't think of it as espionage. They thought of it as sharing something with someone they trusted. One of Wolf's Romeo agents worked his way across a long career into the office of West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt. Another agent, codenamed Topaz, worked inside NATO's own headquarters for more than 2 decades. Wolf personally ran the deputy head of West Germany's own intelligence service, the highest-ranking woman in that organization, whose reports were considered so valuable that they reportedly reached the desk of the KGB chief in Moscow on a regular basis. When Wolf reflected on his career in his memoir, published in 1997, he wrote that if he was remembered for anything in espionage history, it would be for perfecting the use of sex in spying. He wasn't boasting about manipulation. He was describing a systematic understanding of how identity works, that people don't reveal secrets to documents or disguises. They reveal secrets to relationships. And relationships are the deepest false identity of all. Wolf died in 2006, aged 83, having never fully faced justice for his operations. He spent his final years writing cookbooks and giving interviews, reinventing himself one last time as a minor public intellectual. The mask, for him, was simply a permanent condition. But here's the part of the fugitive's life that the story of Markus Wolf doesn't capture. Because Wolf operated from safety, from behind a desk in East Berlin, directing agents who bore the actual risk. The people living the fugitive life in person face something Wolf's agents only touch the edges of: the psychological cost of being someone you're not indefinitely. Living under a false identity is not a stable state. It's a chronic condition. Every conversation carries a small calculation. Every new relationship introduces a new risk, because the closer someone gets to you, the more likely they are to notice inconsistencies. You can't relax into intimacy. You can't let your guard down. You can't get drunk at a party and let the old name slip. You can't call your mother. You can't attend a former colleague's funeral. You can't respond to a news story about yourself with the instinct to correct the record. According to research on identity suppression and psychological stress, the sustained effort of maintaining a false self creates what psychologists describe as cognitive load, a permanent background drain on mental resources. The person doing it is running two operating systems simultaneously, all the time. They're performing a character while also being a person. Over time, this produces a kind of paranoia that isn't irrational, because the threats are real, but that becomes increasingly difficult to manage. The smallest things trigger it. A stranger who looks at you a moment too long, a form that asks for your mother's maiden name, a face recognition camera at an airport. The fugitive's world is full of ordinary things that are not ordinary to them. The fugitives who last the longest share one particular psychological trait. According to people who study and track them, they've genuinely committed to the new identity, not as a performance, as a replacement. They've stopped thinking of the old self as the real self and started thinking of the new one as who they actually are. This is not healthy by any conventional psychological standard, but it is effective. The mental shift from "I'm pretending to be someone else" to "I am this person now" removes the cognitive friction of performance. It makes the identity coherent in ways that acting never quite achieves. This is also what makes reintegration, voluntarily returning to a former identity, so psychologically devastating for people who've done it long enough. The person who turns themselves in after 15 years on the run isn't simply going back. They're losing a self they've actually inhabited. The infrastructure of modern tracking makes all of this harder than it was 30 years ago. Facial recognition software has been deployed at airports across Europe, North America, and Asia. Financial transactions leave digital trails that didn't exist in the cash economy of previous decades. Social media creates a web of documented relationships, who you know, where you were, when, that makes constructing a completely clean legend exponentially more difficult. A person with no social media presence in 2025 is itself a red flag in certain contexts, because ordinary people now leave enormous digital footprints simply by existing in the world, and yet people still disappear, successfully, for years, sometimes permanently. Because the technology works in both directions. The same digital tools that make tracking easier also make document acquisition more sophisticated. The same social media platforms that expose location data also provide a framework for constructing a false identity's public record, a trail of photographs, check-ins, and connections that make the fictional person look real. The fugitive with real technical skill in 2025 isn't hiding from digital systems. They're building inside them. The 100 faces of a successful fugitive aren't 100 masks. They're 100 decisions. The decision to order something different, to remember the fake hometown instead of the real one, to let the old friend's call go unanswered, to build the new relationship slowly and genuinely, to never, ever use the old name, not in your head, not in your sleep, not when something surprises you, one face at a time, until there's no other face left. And if the psychology of identity, the question of what actually makes you who you are when you strip away the name, the documents, and the history, is something you want to go deeper on, there's a full video on the science of self and how identity actually forms linked right here. Subscribe if this kind of content, the kind that explains how the world works underneath the surface, is what you're here for. And drop a comment below. If you had to disappear tomorrow and build a new life from scratch, where would you start?